record button. Yay. Little housekeeping, if you would. If you are not in my class and receiving extra credit for another class, do not put this information in the chat, but email me with your name, the class for which you are attending or getting credit for, and the instructor's name. If you email that to me, sgrigsby@columbiastate.edu, I will get that information out. Looks like that our internet is working this time. What a concept that is. But anyway, so I've got 12:02. Let's get started. Dahmer, what can I say? Anybody that knows me knows that I'm big into serial killers, and Jeffrey Dahmer is a solid number two, only because his strangeness, right? The whole eating folks and, you know, putting their bodies into kettles, and I don't know, just kind of strange, right? But I think the psychology of it is even more fascinating considering where he came from, how he grew up, all those environmental and possibly genetic factors. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about cannibalism a little bit of history with that, and just kind of what made Dahmer tick. Okay. So I absolutely had to start this presentation with this quote, and a very infamous quote. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. If you are into classic suspense horror movies, you should know where this came from. I'm not going to tell you. In fact, I tell you what, just put it in the chat if what movie this came from. That'd be kind of cool to see if you guys know. Anyway, so can't not talk about cannibalism, right? I mean, in our modern Western culture, cannibalism is just beyond horror movie theme, right? I mean, it's just gross, right? But if you look at the history of ancient civilizations, most of which I cannot even pronounce, it is quite prolific. All kinds of reasons that people did it. And we're going to talk about some of those, but I mean, it dates all the way back to the Neanderthals, early pre-man, pre-Homo sapien. So it's been around forever. Rome and Greece drank blood on a regular basis. Uh, it's not that uncommon, shockingly. So why did they do it? Well, understand that ancient tribes and ancient peoples did have a belief that if one drank the blood or ate the organs of their opposer, of their enemy, that they would gain the power of said enemy. So, you know, there's that, right? But look, it's been around forever. It's been around. And if we look at modern times, even modern times, and I say modern, I use that term kind of loosely, but pre 1900, we have to look at the Donner Party. If you know anything about your history, there was this great migration to the West in the United States. It wasn't quite United States yet, but the great migration to the West for better opportunities, land, gold, whatever the case may be, right? So this Donner Party, huge party of families that by wagon train went from east to west, ran into really bad weather, okay? Super bad weather that they unexpected. In fact, winter came early that year. They literally came to a fork in the road and they had to make a decision. They could have gone right, which would have been where they should have gone, or they could have gone left, which would have been cut some miles off their path. They decided to go left. Wasn't a good choice. Keep in mind that many of them had died from starvation and attack prior to this, but they made a left-hand turn and they got separated, and snow started to fall, and it was just a disaster. The small group that was left hunkered down, if you will, kind of in a snowbank, and they had a choice to make. They had already eaten their livestock that had died. They had actually started to eat things like belts and shoes to try and stay alive. And look, their friends and family members were dying, right? And they were just lying in the snow. So they had to make a decision, and they made a decision to eat human flesh in order to survive. And because of that, there was a handful of them that did indeed survive the trip. Pardon me. More recently, big I don't know why I can't talk today. Big plane crash 1972, uh, in the Alps. It was horrible. Had a whole plane full of athletes on board. Some, of course, died in the crash, but many of them did not. And there was a handful of them that had to make a decision. And that decision, they had, again, to get out. Nobody could find them. They didn't have GPS back then. It was all that kind of thing. They were going to have to do one of a couple of things. They were either going to have to eat something to survive, and they were going to have to make a trip. And they ended up doing both. They did indeed cannibalize some of their friends and sports mates, if you will. And some did actually make the trip over the Alps and get help, and several survived because of such. So, again, push come to shove, what would you do if, right? So, medical purposes. Look, we've had some strange ideas in our time about medical practices. We have thought that if we, in George Washington's day, we thought if we bled you, bloodletting as it was called, we could actually make an incision and just let you bleed, that would bleed the disease out, right? Not a great idea. Um, George Washington didn't appreciate it too much. But there was also medical practices that believed that if you, again, ate certain organ meats and particularly drank blood, that it was an elixir, if you will. Funerary practices, many cultures use cannibalism and the rites of their dead people. And then, look, we have some folks out there, the third world countries, that still practice ancient rituals that are spiritual in nature that we don't quite understand. So cannibalism is still a practice. And drinking blood is actually the more common than cannibalizing of flesh, but the drinking of blood is pretty common stuff. Okay. So not quite as gross as we thought, but still, I don't know what I would do if that situation ever came. Now, then we get into the deep dark dive, which is what I love, which is we've had serial killers in the past, or we've had killers in the past that have cannibalized their victims. Dahmer, of course, is the best known, but Albert Fish on the left, and then Andre Chikatilo on the right. What a handsome fellow, huh? They ate parts of their victims. And then we had some folks that were just curious. I'm curious, but I don't know. Would I push it that far? Journalist William Seabrook and artist Rick Gibson legally consumed flesh just because they were curious. So again, cannibalism is gross. It makes great horror films, but it's not quite as ostentatious as we think it might be, right? It's relatively common depending on what culture you're at. But we're here to talk about Dahmer, Jeffrey Dahmer. So understand this. Pretty normal childhood, but I want us to go back before that. I want us to talk about pre-birth. So in developmental psych, we talk about prenatal and how important those things are that happen to the baby inside the womb. Absolutely, yes. Understand that Jeffrey Dahmer's mother was severely, severely mentally ill. Okay. She was on numerous medications, antipsychotics back in the day that are no longer legal now. And that had to play a role. That had to play a role. That and the genetic component that his mother was severely mentally ill, those two factors alone, before he was even born, had to play a part. Once he was born, he was one of two boys, mom and dad. Mom wasn't the nurturing type because of her mental illness. She was absent more than she was present. She wasn't a loving, caring, kumbaya kind of mom. That had to have a whole lot of impact. She left the family when he was just a boy, or they should say the parents divorced. And again, when we look at abandonment issues, which is huge with him, we have to look at what impact that had. But as a little bitty kid, he was just a normal guy. He was just a kid. He played. Wasn't really anything early tales per se, right? Dad was a mild mannered, meek fellow. He was an educated fellow. He was a college professor, and he did the best that he could do. He was close with Jeffrey. He did remarry, and stepmom was okay, but she wasn't a raving lunatic. She wasn't the ugly, stepmom. Uh, but she pretty much let dad take care and take over, if you will. So as he matured, as Dahmer started to come into his own, which of course we all know that that's preteen and teen years, he's a loner. Okay. He doesn't really know how to interact with people. He does crazy, stupid crap in school to get attention. In his teen years, mom's already left and stepmom's there and dad's gone a lot with, the teaching thing. And he's kind of trying to find his own way, right? He's not really having a good time. He is, by this point in his teenage years, he is a raging alcoholic. What do we know about addiction and mental health? People with mental health issues, people with uh, 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 abandonment issues, people with neglect issues tend to tamp their pain down with addiction. And of course, the easiest and cheapest thing to get is beer, right? And he just drank a lot. In high school, there are depictions from former classmates that said that he would pop the top on a couple of 12-ounce cans of beer every day in class and just be absolutely drunk off of his butt. So, what do we know now? We know that even in the womb, because of the drugs that his mother took for her severe mental illness, we've got a genetic component, we have a biological component, and now he's born and mom's kind of a negligent, maybe that's not a good word, an absent mother. She's not nurturing. She doesn't hold the child that much. See, we've already got some stuff that's adding up way, way before he's of a cognitive age to understand what's going on. Stepmom comes into the picture and she's okay. She's just there. Okay. She wasn't horrible. Dad was meek and mild. Right. So here's this young boy, young preteen, early teenager trying to find himself, trying to fit in socially. He does not. He's awkward and he's lonely. And also understand that preteen, teenager years, particularly the older he gets as a teenager, he starts to understand that he might not be like everybody else. So he really starts to come into this question his sexuality. Now, when we talk about serial killers, we do have that trifecta that was kind of embraced in the 60s and 70s of the three things that are notorious for serial killers. One is abuse of animals. The second one is starting fires. And the third is bedwetting later in life. And we've kind of gotten away from that. It's not really something that we look at a lot. Uh, was he horrible to animals? It was more of a curiosity with him. And he shared this with his father. He went fishing and hunting with his dad, and their childhood home was next to woods. So he ran across a lot of dead birds and mammals and stuff, and he was curious. So he loved to dissect them. In fact, one of his favorite classes in school, pardon me, was biology, where he could dissect and see what made them tick. Did this play a role? A lot of people want to say that this is what led him down the path to cannibalism. No, I truly don't think so. This was just a natural, perhaps, perhaps morbid curiosity. I don't know. I was into stuff, but I didn't dissect animals at an early age. But he did. Okay, he did. Again, totally isolated. I mean, he loved his dad, but his dad wasn't, warm and fuzzy and wasn't around a lot, not as much as he should be. Right. So as a teenager, particularly a late teen, he's just absolutely unbelievably ridiculous in school. He doesn't make good grades. He's acting out. He's a raging alcoholic. He's trying to come into his own, trying to figure out his sexuality. And when he graduates high school, shockingly, he graduates high school, his dad says, look, you got a choice. Okay. You got to straighten up or something severe is going to have to be done. So he gets him into college, right? He gets him into college. That was just a bust. That was a bust. He couldn't stay sober long enough to attend classes. So he comes home and dad says, you got to go to the military. I'm going to put you in the military. So he goes into the military. Again, a bust. He could not stay sober to do anything. He was dishonorably discharged from the military. Now he's a young man at this point, late teens, early 20s, and he has come into his own, and he realizes that he has an attraction for men. He also is desperately lonely to fit in. Keep in mind, he's tried. He's tried to do the normal thing, go to high school, try to make friends, go to college, and it's just nothing. Nothing is working out for this poor guy, right? Now, again, I'm not taking sympathy on him. I'm just simply trying to explain to you what's going on inside of his head. Now, they use the term sexual deviance. We don't really, deviance is not the word that I would use, but understand, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit, why he did the things that he did. Okay. Um, he was desperate to make friends. Okay, let's go back a little bit. Let's go back. Came out of the military. His dad said, "Okay, look, I am so done with you. I am so done with you. I'm toting your butt off to your grandma's house." Okay, so grandma lived by herself, and he said, "Fine, whatever, good, that's great." So he lives with grandma. Well, this was great because see, nobody was around. Grandma goes to bed early. By this time, he has a job, so he's working. He's got money. He's going out to the bars. He's trying to, dip his toe in, so to speak. This is where he starts to get a little off the rails. This is where his first act of violence starts to happen, right? Again, nobody there to watch him. So his first act was a young man that he picked up as a hitchhiker, and he took him back to the house, and they drank and they smoked some weed, and he killed him. He killed him, and he kind of cut him up in some pieces and put him in a bunch of plastic bags and tucked him under the basement or the crawl space of his grandmother's house. Yay. Um, so we've taken a turn. All right, we've taken a turn. So why does Dahmer feel that he has to kill these people? Why does he feel that he has to have sex with them after they're dead? Like many serial killers, there are traits that he does possess. And when we look at these, we talk about a lack of empathy. Dahmer definitely had a lack of empathy. Even though he did admit that he had remorse for the things that he did, there was a flat affect with this guy. Um, he didn't have charm. He was charming, I suppose, in a sense, but nothing like a Ted Bundy. He wasn't charming in that way. Uh, he didn't regard how other people felt about him. In fact, he thought when the people were making fun of him and laughing at him that they were actually not good. Uh, Guilt, not so much, not so much. So those classic traits that we see with psychopathy or serial killers. Was he educated? He was not particularly educated. He did finally hold a steady job in his late teens through his 20s, only because he needed the money to go do what he needed to do, right? But so in some sense, he was a classic psychopath. In other senses, he was not. I mean, did he come from an abusive, addictive family, a horrible childhood? Not particularly, no. Um, did he, abuse the pet? Did he start fires? No. So he didn't really have a lot of that, right? I mean, he didn't have those classic characteristics. But hindsight being 2020, when we look back on his acts, there wasn't a lot of remorse or empathy with this guy. Okay. So the violence perpetuated. He is living in his grandmother's house, and if you've seen the movie, the latest movie on Netflix about Dahmer, it's fantastic. It's great. He he goes to a department store after they've closed. Actually, he goes in before they close, and he hides himself in the department store as they close, and he takes a male mannequin and he steals it and he carries it home with him. So this male mannequin represents someone that he can be close to, someone that will always be with him, and he keeps it in his room, he keeps it in his bed. Well, grandma finds out about it and says, nope, you're out. So he's out. Okay, family has said, get out, you're living by yourself, go forth and be happy, right? He does. He finds an apartment. He finds an apartment that he can afford. This is important because he finds an apartment in a lower socioeconomic area that is primarily black. In fact, 99% of his neighbors are black. Is that important? It will be in a second. This is where he gets to shine. Okay. He gets to go and do his due and work his work and make his money. And then he goes out to the gay bars at night and he trolls. He tries, he tries to make friends. He tries to maybe have a relationship, but understand this guy has no idea what he's doing. He has no social skills whatsoever. And he's a good looking guy. He's tall, he's blonde, he's well built. I mean, nothing really wrong with him, right? But he doesn't have the social skills it takes to have a relationship. He dampens this with his addiction to alcohol, and that just makes matters worse. So, in his mind's eye, the only way to get people to stay and be with him is to kill them. And there are times that he does not remember. There's a time in a hotel where he takes this young man up to a hotel and they have their way, and he wakes up and he's covered in blood, and the young man is dead because he has literally beat this man to death in a alcoholic rage in a blackout session, right? So there's that. But the reason that he kills them is not for the desire to end their life per se, but the reason is he wants them to stay with him. Okay. He doesn't want them to leave. I know it's weird. I know that. But in his mind's eye, that's what he sees. Okay. Now, does it get worse? Yes, of course it gets worse. When does he start consuming flesh? Later. Later. It's not right off the bat. Not right off the bat. Okay. In fact, he's out of the house in his apartment, cruising the gay bars, having a good time, um, trolling young men. The earliest, the youngest was 14. We're going to talk about that one. But then he decides he's going to dismember them and keep pieces and parts of them with him all the time. So he would cut off their head and literally boil. I know that's gross. Boil the heads clean of the skin and cartilage, and then preserve the skull. In his house, in his apartment, he had numerous skulls of his victims. He would keep some of the organ meat. He would keep some of the organ meat in his freezer, and there's a picture of that. And he would consume this human flesh. Why? Because if he thought that if he could consume their flesh, that they would be with him all of the time. Now, I know that that's not a sane man talking. Thus, he was diagnosed with many mental health issues, including borderline personality disorder, you think? Schizophrenic, basically, schizophrenic type personality disorder. And very few interviews that he did before his death, uh, he would talk about those, not voices so much as desires that would creep up no matter how much he drank or how much he tried to tamp them down. These desires would spring up and he couldn't control himself. So it was pretty bad. Now, he tried numerous times to be somewhat normal. Okay. He tried the high school thing, wasn't successful. He tried the college thing, it wasn't successful. He tried the military thing, that wasn't very successful. He tried, but he was so unsuccessful at being part of a normal culture, along with the biological and the environmental factors, along with the fact of a lack of nurturing. Now he is a chronic, raging alcoholic. The man is never hardly sober except when he goes to work, and I don't even know about then. Um, he's lost and he's wandering around looking for someone that's going to fulfill that need of abandonment, and that's where it comes from, is abandonment, feeling like nobody cares. And I know that's hard for many of us to understand. These are pictures of the victims, and the youngest was this young man right here. This is a horrible picture, I apologize. Interesting story about this young man right here. He's 14, Asian fella. So he gets this guy up to his apartment. And again, he gets them up there. He lures them with drugs and alcohol and video games and movies and, all kinds of stuff, right? This was back in the day when people's inhibitions were not like they are now. So this young man, he has cuffed this young fella and about to do horrible deeds. And somehow this young man gets out. Now he is naked as the day as he was born. So he runs down the street, and Milwaukee police see him, get out of the car, stop him, and he's telling this horrible story about he's about being attacked and all this kind of stuff, right? Being kidnapped. Now, the neighbor that is directly across from Dahmer, this middle-aged black woman, says something is wrong. Something is wrong with this guy. There's odors coming out of his apartment. There's young folks coming in and out all the time. Something's going on. Well, Dahmer shows up and says, "Oh, no, 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 everything's fine. We were just doing a little gameplay. I'm a homosexual." Now let's talk about that for a minute. A lot of the ways that he got the cops to immediately look the other way, because he'd been investigated several times. People report strange noises and smells and stuff, right? And the cops would go into his apartment, or the cops would have a discussion with him. And as soon as he brought up the fact, well, I'm a homosexual, and here, let me show you some photos, they were like, no, 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 we don't want to see that. We don't want to talk about that, and just leave the premises. But here's a white man that shows up on the scene with this young Asian boy and a middle-aged black woman neighbor. And who do the police listen to? Not the victim, not the neighbor, but the white man. So they let this young man go back to the apartment with Jeffrey Dahmer. And of course, we all know that did not end well. Another interesting fact is that I believe it was this fellow right here with the glasses was the one person in his entire life that he actually kind of had a relationship with. They met numerous times, several times for several months, had lunch together, dinner together, would hang out and watch movies together. It was almost like a relationship. But then, of course, that didn't end well either, right? So these are his victims. And if you'll notice, the vast majority of them are black, which, of course, considering the neighborhood that he was in, this was the population that he chose that was around him. This one right here was the very first. This was the hitchhiker that he took back to grandma's house and dismembered and shoved up underneath the crawl space. But yeah, so I mean, what can I say about this guy? So finally, he was caught. Finally, the cops listened and said, "Look, there's a horrible smell coming out of this apartment. You need to go in here and investigate." Sure enough, they went in, and these are just the pictures that I could show. There's some things that I can't show that are just pretty gross. They found several containers like this that had body parts and of skeletons that were decomposing, that he'd put them in acid. This was a stand-up freezer that had also body parts. This was inside his home freezer, bits and pieces of organ meats that he consumed. So it was horrible. Okay, it was absolutely god awful horrible, because I'm not sure at that point in time in history of serial killing, because this is still early. Okay, I mean Ted Bundy and Night Stalker and all those cats, John Wayne Gacy. I mean, um, we never had anybody like this that hunted, if you will, their victims and killed and stored and ate them, right? I mean, typically serial killers kill and maim and leave in the woods, or John Wayne Gacy, put him in the basement kind of thing, right? Um, this was horrible. This was absolutely god awful horrible. And the problem is that numerous folks had reported this activity, but yet the cops wouldn't listen. So there was a lot of cultural disparity going on at the time. A, lower socioeconomic. B, it was black. And three, you had this white guy who we're going to listen to. Then, of course, the whole homosexuality and the fact that nobody wanted to talk about it, that spurred a lot of animosity, right? So look, Dahmer. What can I say about Dahmer? Um, we caught him. Yay, we caught him. 1992, he was sentenced 15 consecutive life terms, and then a 16th was added later on. Um, Sentenced right off the bat. Here's the deal: 2 years later, he was killed in prison. I almost think that was a shame because I would have loved. This is the guy that I would have liked to have run through CAT scans and PET scans. I would have liked to have sat down and had lengthy conversations with this man to see where he really came from. Only now do we know from his father, I think just died. Could be wrong, but I think has put out a book, of course, and has had two lengthy interviews with the press. And now we know more than we used to know. Dahmer was indeed a monster. Okay, they called him the Milwaukee Monster. They called it the Milwaukee Cannibal. But there were tons and tons of reasons as to why he was the way he was. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. Should he have gotten all those life sentences? Sure. Could he have gotten the death penalty? Sure. Just like Bundy? Absolutely. But I think it's important for us to understand why and how these mass murderers, where do they come from, right? And he was a little different. He was a little different than some. He truly had a genetic and a biological component that perhaps the others didn't have. He most certainly had the abandonment issue, which a lot of them do have. And because of that, he felt like he was alone. He didn't have social skills, so he couldn't fit in, even though he tried. So as he got older, he continued to suppress this loneliness and his own mental health issues with alcohol. Coming in as a preteen and a teenager, he started to question his sexuality and realized that he was a homosexual. Not a good thing at this time. It was not out and about as it should have been, right? So he had that to confront. So as he got on his own and he lived on his own and made his own money, he didn't know how to act. The only way he thought that he could keep these people close to him, which is all he wanted, was to kill them. And then, of course, eventually eat bits and pieces of them. So when you look at his house and his apartment, he had altars, he had skulls, he had pieces and parts, he had people decomposing in the corner in a tub. It was absolutely god awful gross, right? But the bottom line is, all he was looking was to belong. And when we talk about belonging, and we talk about Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, that middle component in the triangle is belonging. We all, I don't care who we are, want to feel that we belong to something or someone, right? We want that feeling of community, and Jeffrey Dahmer did not have it. Did that give him the right to go do what he did? Absolutely not. But again, we have to look at his mental health and how much that contributed to all of this. So, Jeffrey Dahmer, what can I say? I know, short and sweet, right? I told you it wasn't going to be very long. Jeffrey Dahmer, short and sweet. What kind of questions do you have for me? Who got the Hannibal? Good. Yes, that was it. Any questions? Some of you popped in late, I know. No? Nothing? Zero? Zip? Did you guys know a lot about Dahmer before coming into the lecture? Did you guys watch the movie on Netflix? Oh, so good. So good. So good. So good. Okay. What kind of press was being released shortly after he was arrested? Oh, tons of press, tons of pictures. Those images that I showed you were actually from the press. Yeah, but here's the deal: is that he was under the radar, right? I mean, it wasn't like Bundy or um, God, BTK, any of those where you had missing girls or missing people. You didn't have any of that, right? Because think about the people he chose. The people that he chose to kill, minus a couple, were people that were of the underrepresented community anyway. Black, juvenile, runaways, gay. I mean, you know, there wasn't a lot. And in that type of community, things happen to these folks every day. So for them to be missing wasn't necessarily a big deal. It's much like when you think about those who kill, like BTK, not BTK, but Green River Killer, who killed prostitutes, right? Who killed sex workers. Those people aren't going to be missed. I mean, you know, right? So it's not like Bundy. You know, Bundy killed college age girls. I mean, he killed, you know, the girl next door, right? And left them out in the open for people to find, or left them in their bed for people to find. The Night Stalker. I mean, he was random. He killed anybody and everybody, old, young, male, female, didn't matter. He stabbed them to death and choked them and he just left them in their bed. But Dahmer, A, there was no evidence, and B, the people that he killed, nobody was looking for. So he was under the radar for so long, even though people were saying, look, this dude's not right. There's something really smelly coming out of his apartment, right? He even carried, oh my God, he even carried a head, a freshly severed head in his work bag to work with him and kept it in the locker. I mean, right? But again, he wanted to belong. He wanted people to stay. Okay. And that was his way of getting them to stay is to kill them. Interestingly enough. Fascinating guy. Fascinating guy. I think the fact that he cannibalized some of his victims makes him even grosser, right? But on the other hand, in my opinion, I think that makes him even more interesting. So he is a solid number two. People who know me know who my number one is. Sydney should know. Who's my number one serial killer, Sydney?
It's Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy. I might have to do him next semester. I don't know.
I hope you do.
I think I might. You know, I haven't. I kind of talked about him briefly, but I haven't given a whole, I don't know, 37 minutes. If there were more of you, maybe I would have talked longer. I don't know. But yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I will. I think I might. I think I might. Anyway, folks, I thank you for being here. And I'll see you next time. Take care.